We have some time for questions, so I've got a question for each of the panelists, and I would ask that you respond when I ask you the question. So the first one is for Gail. So Gail, what advice do you have for educators who want to authentically engage with Indigenous histories and perspectives in the classroom?
I think it's been said here lots. One of the things, we get this request all the time, this question, and one of our foundational workshops that we've developed with Kairos through the Blanket is the Exploring Historical Relationships, also known as the Blanket Exercise, because you are experiencing it and you are emotionally engaged, and your learning is here and not just up here. So that would be my response.
Shanish, is there anyone else on the panel that would like to add to that? They want to stick to their questions. Shanish, thank you. Baudoouin, quel conseil pouvez-vous donner aux Canadiens qui souhaitent comprendre les histoires autochtones?
Quel conseil doit-on donner?
Oui, merci.
Je dirais, le conseil que je pourrais donner aux Canadiens, étant donné que c'est grand le Canada, c'est d'ouvrir son esprit et d'ouvrir son cœur afin d'accueillir l'histoire qu'il est là. On ne l'a pas inventé, l'histoire. Et comme je le disais, l'accueillir les mains ouvertes avec les 7 enseignements de nos grands-pères, avec amour, avec humilité, avec tout ce que la Madame Commandant nous disait. C'est d'accueillir, pas peut-être pour en faire une histoire, mais pour en faire son histoire. Tout comme moi, je pèse peut-être 300 livres, 6 pieds, mais j'ai commencé à donner des enseignements autochtones spirituels dans 2 écoles anglaises qui m'ont invité à y aller, à rencontrer les jeunes du secondaire pour leur parler de l'histoire un peu aussi des pensionnats, car je suis un ex-pensionnaire aussi. Donc, comme le titre ici, raconter les histoires authentiques des peuples autochtones, ça me touche beaucoup. Voici, merci.
Lisa. Lisa, I've had the absolute joy of being able to visit Lisa's class. They are quite the crew. They are so inspiring. So I saved this one for you, Lisa. Can you share one instance when you were reminded that education has the opportunity to bring all Canadians onto the path of reconciliation?
Well, I think that that's every day for me, and maybe for some of you as teachers too. That's every day we see the transformative power of education. But we have to be worried that, education has the other side too, to disempower. I see everyday kids that, as I was saying in my presentation, that have felt disenfranchised, and learning about truth and justice empowers them, wakes them up. And a lot of the children that I work with are children that are struggling with reading and writing and math skills. So I think for me that's one of the most inspiring parts of this story, is that anyone can be involved in reconciliation at any level. It doesn't matter what language you speak or how well you write or read. It's about feeling the necessity to be involved, and I think that comes from your heart. So,
Shanish, thank you. I think it's appropriate. I think it's appropriate considering where we are today. I'd like to share a little story that came from my time with Lisa's students, very young students, and we were with Cindy Blackstock and hundreds of young people here in Algonquin Territory. And it was the Our Dreams Matter 2 rally where students, Indigenous and non-Indigenous students alike, marched together from Victoria Island to Parliament Hill to advocate for equity for all children and for First Nation children. And it was pouring rain. And we were walking and the children were chanting, "All dreams matter, all dreams matter." And there's a little brother and sister that were non-Indigenous that were in Lisa's class. And the little sister, Shelby, as we walked past the hill, and they were putting down sod on the hill. And she was 8 years old. And she looked at me and she said, "Charlene, do you know what they're doing there?" I'm an adult. I just saw people putting down grass. And I said, "Yeah, they're planting grass." And she said, "No, they're trying to make that place look beautiful. And what happens in there to First Nation children is not beautiful." So when people say to you, as was indicated here more than once, the children in elementary school are too young, I would like to remind you the children are fine. It's the adults who can't handle it.
Absolutely.
And Anne, you spoke briefly to the fact that there's more to asking Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders to share their knowledge. So I'm wondering if you could give some advice to educators. And often people think that it's non-Indigenous educators, but in some cases, because of residential school, I think we all know that in some cases even Indigenous educators are not clear. So just what advice can you give, please, to educators wanting to create relationships with Indigenous elders, knowledge keepers, and community members?
Sure. If you're an educator in the education system and you're reaching out to local Indigenous community elders, perhaps inviting them into your classroom, there's a lot of work that has to be done before they come in. Our schools and our institutions are still very threatening places to many of our community members. Even if they didn't go to residential school, the intergenerational impacts have been passed down. And education hasn't been a very positive experience for many people of Indigenous ancestry. So inviting them in means treating them with the highest honor, that they are your guests of honor, and you would treat them with the same level of respect and protocol as you would a visiting dignitary. All the preparation that goes into ensuring that from the moment they walk through that door and into the building, they are welcomed, they feel safe, they've been offered something to eat or something to drink. The students are prepared. You've talked to your students about respectful behavior, verbal and nonverbal communication when there's a guest speaker there, and that you're protecting that guest speaker's or that elder's presence with as much respect as possible. If you're a researcher working with Indigenous community members or elders, that relationship building piece is so important. Taking the time to go to them and taking the time that it takes, however long it takes, before diving into the work at hand. I remember hearing from Wendy Wickwire. She was a professor at UVic, and she used to come into my classes in Victoria. Wendy spent decades working with Okanagan elder Harry Robinson. And I remember her sharing with me that the first time she went to meet Harry, she thought she might be there for an hour or two. And she was there overnight, well into the next day, and they hadn't even got to the question yet. It was just getting to know Harry. And then she spent weeks and then months and then years working with Harry, capturing his oral narratives. And when she presented Harry's work, She presented them word for word as they were spoken. She didn't change it to make it fit into the norms of English language, because English was not his first language. His Indigenous language was first. So she presented what he shared in this really beautiful, poetic way of representing verse on the page, but without changing or altering it. And she did that work a long time ago. But she recognized that work, that building relationship piece, not changing what is spoken and not doing it for personal reason, and sharing it in only the way it was originally agreed upon. Thank you.
Thank you. So just as we close up this part of the day and this panel, and I'd like to thank each of you so very much for sharing your experience and your successes and the successes of your children and your school communities. But I would also like to just remind everyone in the room that we often talk about maintaining Indigenous language, and that's so important in revitalizing Indigenous language. But in education, especially around reconciliation, we also often talk about our use of English and how we use English terms when we're looking at indigenizing the academy or indigenizing education or representing authentic Indigenous histories. And so Anne alluded to this in her presentation. And I think it's important that we remember that when we talk about teachers, we're all teachers. All of you are teachers. As parents and as grandparents, we are our children's first teachers. And that we do all have a role in education, and we do all have a huge role in this work in Indigenous histories and reconciliation. And often, as we've heard represented here, and as I think we know in our own lives, in our own work, and in our own families, that right now at this place that we are in our history, sometimes we're more the students than the teachers. And it's the teacher candidates that are doing the leading often in schools now, where there are teachers that didn't have the benefit of this education, and that it's our children that are leading us. So I would just invite you to find yourself, each of you, in the spaces between the calls to action, in the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We each know our own strengths, we each know our own place and where we can have that influence. So within that field of education, I really invite you to all find your place in there. What will your contribution to that be? What will your action be as we all work together alongside one another on this path to reconciliation through education? And with that, I'll turn it back to Ryan. Thank you so much.